Here today, in this week's video, we're going to be diving into hydration beyond water. Naturally, whenever we talk about hydration, the first thought that everybody goes to is water, as it should be typically. And we're going to break down how much to be consuming, when are sports drinks necessary, what types of beverages, and how to really understand what you need from a hydration perspective. And so the first thing that we want to dive into is what hydration actually does. Truly, your hydration is going to impact every aspect of your well-being. It is more than just decreasing your thirst and making you feel comfortable. It really is the infrastructure for your overall performance. Every single system, muscular, cardiovascular, neurological, it all depends on your hydration level. Fluid is what regulates everything. It's going to be able to help keep your core temperature down. It's going to maintain your blood volume to be able to help cardiovascularly avoid your heart rate from spiking too quick too soon. And it's going to allow for just neuromuscular signaling to decrease the chances of cramps. And again, keep the body performing optimally. When that fluid level starts to drop, that's when some challenges start to arise. Because when the fluid drops and we start to enter a dehydrated state, the body naturally is going to try to keep itself going. But because it doesn't have the fluid to perform optimally, it's going to start making trade offs. Some things are going to start to get sacrificed. And as a result, the performance isn't able to maintain and stay up at the level that you know you're capable of. So you need to begin thinking, if you're not already, of your hydration as an extension of what you're already doing from a sleep and nutrition perspective. It is part of your recovery tool. It is part of your performance aspect of things. If you want to be optimizing every aspect of things, this needs to be at the core and the center of all of that. And so when it comes to understanding how much fluid, how much sodium to be consuming, this is where it gets incredibly individualized. There are going to be those benchmark recommendations, and that's typically what you're going to see. If you're with a team or anything like that, you're going to get the general baseline recommendations, which are great to start that understanding of what you need to be doing. But it's not necessarily going to be 100% specifically tailored and giving you everything that you yourself need, because no two athletes are going to be exactly alike. So, big picture, that benchmark and that baseline that typically gets recommended is half of your body weight in pounds is what you need to be consuming in fluid ounces daily as a bare minimum to maintain that hydrated status. So, if you have an individual, if you happen to be 160 pounds, 80 ounces of fluid is what you need to be consuming every single day. This does not include what's getting tacked on top of our training sessions and game day sessions and things like that to replace what we're sweating. Because not only are we needing to replace what we sweat, how much we sweat and the composition of that sweat varies wildly from athlete to athlete. And this is where it just takes your self awareness and taking time to really kind of dive into how you specifically respond, what you need to be doing to keep yourself in a good spot. Because in general, sweat rates for individuals are going to vary from anywhere from half a liter to 2.5 liters per hour, depending on the athlete, depending on how hot or humid the environment is. And then that sweat that you're losing is also going to vary in how much sodium is contained with that. And the concentration of that sodium can vary even more, up to 10 times of a difference from athlete to athlete. A lot of this depends too on kind of like how much sodium is in your diet in and of itself, to where a higher sodium consumer is going to sweat more, which makes sense. You got more in the system, the body's not going to be overly concerned about preserving it because it knows it's got a lot in the tank. So you're going to lose more. But you also want to make sure that you replenish all of that. So this again is just another variable that's going to need to be individualized and something that you want to be very mindful of. If we're not mindful of this and we are becoming dehydrated, there is a lot at stake that it is going to cost you. So if we look at an average individual over the course of an entire soccer match, an average athlete is going to lose about 3 liters of fluid during a hot soccer match. That's quite a lot of fluid. Now, this does not necessarily take into consideration what's being consumed during the game itself as well. So yes, we lose 3 liters, but we also consume quite a bit during the game. On average, though, we're coming nowhere near to completely replenishing that and replacing that. It's usually on average about 55%. So about half of what we're losing in sweat is getting replaced from the fluid that we're consuming. Depending on how much we're losing, half may keep us in a relatively good spot, but not always, especially when it gets super hot out there. Replacing half is great, but we need to be closer. We don't need to maintain exactly like going back to baseline and maintaining a euhydrated state where at the difference from the start to the end, we've lost nothing. And we certainly don't want to gain by overhydrating. A little dip is okay, but we don't want to have too much. So this again just kind of comes back to the individual aspect of evaluate how much are you yourself losing, and we'll dive into that here coming up, and making sure that we're doing our best during the game itself to replenish all of that. Because what can occur if we are not being mindful and intentional about this is when we start to become dehydrated across the board, the performance really starts to dip. You're going to notice reduced sprint speeds, power outputs. Those more intense and explosive movements are some of the first things that really get hit. Then we have an elevated heart rate and core temperature. These are things that are going to have that fatigue hit us quicker, and the body's naturally going to try to protect itself and slow us down. In addition to that, we're going to have a greater risk of cramping and heat-related illnesses, both things we do not want. Then if that dehydration lingers there afterwards, after the game, it's going to slow down our recovery process. So especially if we've got another game coming up quickly behind or quickly thereafter, not being optimally hydrated is going to slow down that recovery to where our next game, we're already starting behind the 8 ball and our performance is already going to be taking a hit before the first whistle even blows. The other thing that hydration is going to impact, and it's one that doesn't always get talked about, is how it's going to impact your cognitive function, your decision-making ability, your ability to read the defense quickly. Hydration is going to impact every aspect of your performance. It's going to impact that mental component as well. Even mild dehydration, where we're losing only maybe 1% to 2% of our body weight, that's going to be enough to really start to impact that mental function of things. Your reaction time, the processing speed, your focus and awareness are all going to be impacted. Outside of that, your emotional regulation is also going to be impacted. If you don't get the call from the ref that you would expect, say somebody comes up and fouls you, yeah, probably call that. If you don't get that call, you might be a little bit more sensitive and reactive to all of that and end up with a card being called on yourself. Don't do that. Don't fall into that trap. So staying hydrated is going to be able to help all aspects of things. So we want to make sure that we keep the fluid on hand early and often, take advantage of the half times and any hydration breaks that we have to maintain that hydration as optimally as we can. Because what we don't want to do is just rely on our thirst as being the indicator of when we need to be drinking fluid. If we are only doing that, by the time that we're thirsty, we are already behind. We are already dehydrated. That thirst is kind of a last ditch effort of the body being like, hey, it's been a while. What are you doing? We need some fluid to be able to get that hydration back up. So if we rely purely on thirst, we're constantly trying to play catch up. Don't do that. What we want to do is make sure that we set ourselves up with a schedule, a regimen of when do we need to be drinking, how often do we need to be drinking, to make sure that we stay on top of that. The body isn't always going to be able to notify us and let us know when we need to be doing that, and we need to be proactive about that. So based on your schedule, based on what you know your needs are, have that schedule. How much should we have at breakfast? What should we be doing at lunchtime? And then what should we be doing leading up to the game? And that's where we're going to dive into part of what to actually be drinking, how to know whether water's better, sports drinks, when to have some of those electrolyte packets, and things of that nature, because there's a whole lot of hydration products out there. Because from a marketing standpoint, they are aware of the impact that hydration has on every aspect of our well-being. And they're going to try to capitalize on that, which can be great from the standpoint of there's a lot of different products out there to where there's going to be something for everybody. It's not great from the standpoint of it can cause a lot of confusion, and a lot of those products may not necessarily be optimal for what we're actually needing. So from a water perspective, Water is 9 times out of 10 going to be the go-to throughout the day. It's really going to be beneficial during your training sessions when they are shorter, lower intensity, and during cool conditions. If it's short, cool conditions, not overly intense, the sweat isn't going to be as high. The sweat rate isn't going to be as much. So yeah, water is going to be perfectly fine. As that intensity and the duration and the temperature all increase, that's when our need for some electrolytes are going to come into play. Sports drinks are going to be great for that aspect of things because, again, as that intensity increases, so too does our carbohydrate usage. So having a sports drink, which is going to replace the fluids, the electrolytes, and provide some carbs for that energy, is going to be fantastic. Because the kicker too is as that temperature increases, that's going to cause an internal stress on the body because it's forcing the body to have to try and cool itself down. Anytime the body has an increase in stress, whether it be physical or anything like that, it increases the carb usage. How much of a percentage wise we use carbs versus fat. The greater the intensity, the greater the stress, the greater the carb usage. So in hot environments, when that stress is higher on the body, that carb usage is naturally going to be a little bit higher. So to offset that, focusing on something that contains a little bit of carbohydrates can be great, such as sports drinks. This is what they were designed and made for. Then, when it comes to some of the additional electrolyte packets, those higher sodium products, those are going to be great for those super hot days, the multi-game days when we're sweating a ton, and any salty sweaters. If you are an individual who ever notices after games or after hard training sessions, feeling the skin, you've got like that grittiness on it, or especially if you have a dark colored shirt or a hat that you wear, and you notice white streaks forming on it, that is sodium buildup. That's the body's sodium leaving with the sweat. If you notice those things, you are absolutely falling into the category of being a salty sweater. And we want to make sure we're offsetting that. So if you notice those things, an electrolyte packet is very likely going to be beneficial for you. So this is all kind of coming into that individualized aspect of things based on what is your body specifically calling for as well. Now, when it comes to the structure of when to be focusing on hydration, how much really to be consuming, that baseline aspect of things, half your body weight in pounds is how many ounces per day to be consuming. Now, when we get to kind of the timing aspect of some of this, we really want to focus on the 24 hours before a game. We don't want to depend solely on just that pre-game meal to be able to get all of our hydration needs in. Because if we go into that meal dehydrated, the 3 hours before the game is not going to be sufficient to be able to get us into a hydrated state. So a lot of times this is going to start the day before. We want to make sure that we're staying on top of everything. So come that evening, come that dinner time, we want to do a quick little check, an evaluation of what is our urine color? Are we a pale yellow and in a great spot? Or are we kind of a darker apple juice color, kind of a brown color? And if so, that should be a red flag. Some alarm should be going off. We really need to dive into that hydration piece and start to get ourselves back into a hydrated state. So if we do that about 24 hours before the game, we've actually got some time to be able to address that. Going back to if we do that only pre-game meal, we're going to be in a world of hurt if we end up in apple juice colored territory and knowing that we've only got 3 hours to try and amend that. Not likely going to happen. So the day before, evaluate the urine color and hydrate accordingly. Make sure you're continuing to sip constantly the day before. Chugging is not going to resolve the issue. And then when we wake up the morning of a game day, we aim for 16 to 20 ounces. Because when we sleep throughout the night, the body's naturally starting to get a little bit more dehydrated because we can't drink while we're sleeping, unless you got a cool superpower I'm not aware of. So we want to make sure that we set the body up for success, replenish what we weren't able to consume during the night, and get out to a good start. Then, as we approach game day, that pre-game aspect of things, that 3 to 4 hour window there, that's the last opportunity to be able to consume a little bit more substantial amounts of fluid. Again, because we got that time now where the body can process it a little bit better. So typically, that's going to be another 16 to 24 ounces that we will be able to get in during that time. Then if we look at a straight up kind of timeline and a calendar of all of that, this walks through a lot of what we were just discussing. The night before, be consistent throughout that entire day. Leading up to the evening, keep an eye on the urine color, make sure we're staying a nice pale yellow. The morning of, 16 to 20 ounces upon waking up. Continue to sip on water throughout the morning, throughout the rest of the day, leading up to that pregame meal, 3 to 4 hours beforehand. Have 16 to 24 ounces of water, perhaps a sports drink if you need some extra carbs in there. Keep an eye on the urine color. Then 30 to 60 minutes before, because we have less time, we don't want to chug, but aim for about 8 to 12 ounces of a sports drink in there. Then, leading up into the game, continue to sip on water. Make sure we keep that hydration up. Then at halftime, that's when a sports drink can come in really handy. Add in a little extra electrolytes as well. If it's super sweaty and a pretty hot game, to make sure that we're starting the second half on the right foot. Then, post game. This is where if we weighed ourselves before the game and weighed ourselves after the game in dry clothes to eliminate the sweat weight, for every pound that we've lost, that's going to indicate we need to replace 16 to 24 ounces of fluid. So if we've lost 2 pounds, we need to be consuming 32 to 48 ounces of water. It may seem like a lot, but if you've lost that amount of weight, you're going to start to drink and be like, oh, okay, this is actually going down a little bit easier than I thought. We want to try to get that in as relatively quickly as we can, because that's going to be able to help get us into a more hydrated state again to maximize the recovery piece. When we're dehydrated, recovery tends to lag a little bit. It's a little bit tougher. So the sooner we get back to being rehydrated, the sooner the body can optimally start recovering, and the better we're going to feel come the next day. So don't feel as though you have to chug all of that immediately as soon as that last whistle goes, but we want to be mindful and intentional of how much we want to consume, and to start the process of just sipping on that and drinking that steadily and consistently to get to that point. And this is where, again, thirst is not going to be your best indicator on when to be drinking and how much to be drinking, because throughout all of this, the thirst likely is not really going to be there at all of these opportune times. So we want to have this structure. We want to have this schedule to be able to stay on top of that. Then a quick note for females. Females are going to respond a little bit differently, because typically they're going to heat up twice as fast as a male athlete in general would. This is going to occur when dehydrated. The body is going to be a lot more sensitive to that temperature increase. This really emphasizes even more so how important hydration is for female athletes. There's some comments out there to where they may say, based on the menstrual cycle and what phase you're in, that it's going to impact your hydration needs, your electrolyte needs, and things like that. That's not necessarily true. Some of that gets taken out of context to where, based on your phase, yeah, your core temperature at baseline can be a little bit higher, in particular in the luteal phase. But more research and more studies have shown that's not really going to impact your overall sweat rate, the increase in the core temperature during training itself, and the overall fluid and electrolyte needs as a result of everything there. So you still need to make sure that you're staying hydrated, but you definitely need to make sure that you're keeping yourself hydrated to avoid that quick rate of temperature increase. So the phase of your cycle may not impact directly what that change is, but the absolute is athletes are going to heat up quicker than males. So we want to make sure that the hydration is there to be able to help with that temperature regulation to avoid any negatives from that aspect of things. So the big action item after all of this is, if there's one thing to take away, it's to start to figure out and understand what is your specific hydration and electrolyte needs. The best way to do that is with the weighing aspect of things. So before your next training session, weigh yourself. Weigh yourself in dry, minimal clothing, and then go out to practice. Track what you consume and drink as best as you can from an overall volume standpoint, and then after practice, come back. Ensure that your clothes are dry, have it be relatively similar clothing to what you weighed in at, and see, what did you weigh out as? That's going to indicate how much fluid you lost during the training session itself. For every pound that you lose, remember, it's another 16 to 24 ounces of fluid. Add to that what you consumed during the practice itself, and that's going to give you an idea that for that type of practice, that duration of a practice, how much do you need to be aiming for or keep in mind to consume during that session itself. You don't need to replenish everything, but by simply having that awareness, it's going to be able to give you a little bit more of a definitive and quantitative number to kind of shoot for and keep in mind of. And then with that, check your salt. If you've never really looked at it or thought about it before after those training sessions, just look. Do you notice any of those white streaks appearing around the collar of your neck? Or if you're training and you happen to wear a hat, do you notice any white streaks around the brim of your hat? Those are going to be indicators that your sodium needs are going to be a little bit higher. But it starts with just having that awareness and assessing that. Now, some common questions that tend to pop up on this topic is, do I really need a sports drink or is water enough? This is really going to come back to the specific situation. Is it a short, relatively low intensity, relatively cool temperature situation? And if so, no, you don't need a sports drink. Water is going to be perfectly fine for the vast majority of individuals in that situation. As the intensity and the duration of that practice increases and as the temperature increases, so too then is your likely need for a sports drink, for an increased carb intake, increased sodium intake, which are all going to be able to help keep you in a optimal state. Then what if my athlete just doesn't like drinking water? This is relatively common, and that's where flavor 100% matters. And there's a lot of ways to be able to add some flavor to that water while still making sure that we're maximizing the overall hydration aspect of things. So one way is you can mix in a small amount of 100% fruit juice. If you do a splash of orange juice, a splash of apple juice, or what have you, whatever your favorite flavor is, that can be enough to be able to provide that little bit of change in taste to increase the consumption rate. If you happen to be an individual who's a salty sweater and we need to replace those electrolytes, yeah, adding an electrolyte packet can be fantastic. But then another alternative is using some of those zero sugar flavoring enhancers. Like there's Crystal Light, there's Neo, there's all sorts of products out there now to be able to provide a little bit of a flavor enhancer to get that fluid in. At the end of the day, that's the biggest thing. We want to make sure that we're getting that fluid in to maintain a hydrated state. And then last but not least, one of the most popular questions I get is just in general, how much water should my athlete drink per day? This is where we come to that benchmark, that baseline guideline of half of your body weight in ounces per day. So for a 160-pound athlete, that's 80 ounces of fluid per day. That's 10 cups per day. For a 140-pound athlete, that's 70 ounces of fluid per day. This is to maintain that baseline optimal hydration status. What we then want to add on top of that is what we're losing during training and during games as we're sweating a lot. So your urine color is going to be a great indicator and feedback of how are we doing from that overall fluid consumption and hydration status. Pale yellow, great. Super dark, apple juice type color, not so great. And we want to hit that a little bit harder and increase that overall fluid consumption. But that's what's going to be the best feedback to really assess how much should we be drinking day in and day out. But that starting point and that reference point is going to be half your body weight in ounces per day.